She cleaned his cabin for coins, then said, "Mama used to work here before you left." The copper coins felt like dead weight in Mercy's palm, 17 years old, and her hand shook like an old woman's as she counted them on the scarred wooden table. 1, 2, 3. The metal was warm from her fingers, slick with sweat that wouldn't stop coming no matter how many times she wiped her hands on her jeans. Judge Harlan Cray stood in the doorway of his cabin kitchen, watching her count his money. The shadows cut across his face, making him look older than his 43 years. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up like he'd been doing real work instead of just watching her scrub his floors for the past 4 hours. The cabin smelled like lemon soap and old wood, and something else underneath that made Mercy's stomach turn. Something that felt like secrets rotting in the walls. "That's all of it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. $15. Harlan shifted his weight against the doorframe. "You did good work." "Yeah." Mercy's fingers closed around the coins. They felt heavy and wrong, like payment for something she didn't want to sell. "I did." The silence stretched between them, thick as honey. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like whispers. Mercy looked up from the coins and met his eyes for the first time since she'd knocked on his door that morning, looking for work. "Mama used to work here before you left." The words came out steady and sure, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Harlan went rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the doorframe. "What did you say?" "You heard me." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Mercy stood up from the table, the coins clutched in her fist. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden quiet. "I found her initials," she said, "carved under your kitchen sink. E.V. Elena Vega." Harlan's face had gone pale as milk. "That doesn't mean anything." "It means everything." She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a photograph, creased and yellowed with age. A young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, her head tilted back against a man's shoulder. The man's face was younger, unlined by guilt and years, but it was unmistakably Harlan Cray. "I found this in Mama's Bible," Mercy said, holding the photograph between them like evidence in a trial. Hidden behind the Book of Ruth, Harlan stared at the picture like it might burst into flames. "Where did you get that?" "I told you. Mama kept it." "Your mother is dead. She died last winter while you were living in the state capitol, wearing your judge's robes and making speeches about justice." The words hit him like physical blows. He took a step back into the shadows of his cabin, shaking his head. "You don't understand." "I understand plenty. It's not what you think. What I think is that you left her pregnant and alone 23 years ago. That's not... What I think is that you came back to this town 6 months ago like some kind of hero, and she was still here, still cleaning houses for people like you." Harlan's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. "I didn't know she was still here." "Liar." "I'm not lying. You're a judge. You know everything that happens in this county." "Mercy, please." She flinched at the sound of her name in his mouth. "Don't. Let me explain." "Explain what? How you promised her you'd come back? How you were going to marry her after law school? How you were going to build her a house with a garden?" Each question was a knife thrust, precise and clean. Harlan stumbled backward until his spine hit the cabin wall. "She told you that." "She didn't tell me anything." "I read your letters." "Jesus Christ." "She kept every single one. All those promises you made. All those lies." Harlan ran his hands through his graying hair, pulling at it like he could tear the guilt right out of his skull. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Like what?" "I was going to come back for her." "When?" "After she died of cancer because she couldn't afford treatment." "After she worked herself to death cleaning other people's houses?" "I didn't know she was sick." "You didn't want to know." The truth of it settled between them like dust. Mercy pocketed the photograph and the coins, their weight like stones in her jeans. "I should go." "Wait." But she was already walking toward the door, her boots loud on the wooden floor. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. Harlan stood in his kitchen like a man facing execution, surrounded by the smell of lemon soap and the weight of old sins. "She never told me your name," Mercy said, her voice quiet as prayer. "But I knew it was you the moment I saw this place. I could feel her here. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Harlan stood alone in his cabin, listening to the sound of her footsteps fading into the forest. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The dirt path wound through the pine trees like a scar, leading Mercy home through shadows that felt too thick for afternoon. The coins burned in her pocket, 15 pieces of copper that weighed more than they should. Her boots kicked up dust with each step, and every familiar landmark triggered memories she'd buried deep. There was the fallen oak where her mother used to sit during her breaks between cleaning jobs, counting tips and rubbing her swollen feet. There was the creek where Elena would wash their clothes when the electricity got cut off, her hands red and cracked from the cold water. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy like other kids?" "Some men can't stay, baby. Doesn't mean they don't love you." But where did he go? Somewhere far away, somewhere we can't follow. Mercy had been 7 then, sitting on the creek bank while her mother scrubbed their shirts against the rocks. Elena's voice had been soft but final, the way it always got when she wanted to end a conversation. The memories came faster now, triggered by the weight of truth in her pocket. Elena working 3 cleaning jobs, coming home so tired she could barely stand. Elena falling asleep at the kitchen table, her face pressed against unpaid bills. Elena coughing through the winter nights, refusing to see a doctor because they couldn't afford it. Someone who couldn't stay. That's all she'd ever said about Mercy's father. Never a name. Never a reason. Just that phrase, repeated like a prayer every time Mercy asked. The Vega house sat at the end of the path, small and weathered, and held together by stubbornness. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with linoleum that curled at the edges. Home. Mercy pushed through the front door and walked straight to her mother's bedroom. She'd avoided this room since the funeral 6 months ago. Couldn't stand the smell of Elena's perfume still lingering on the pillows. But today, she had questions that needed answers. The room looked exactly the same. Bed made with hospital corners, dresser covered with framed photos of Mercy and Tommy at various ages, Bible sitting on the nightstand, leather cover worn smooth from Elena's hands. Mercy pulled out the photograph again, studying her mother's young face. Elena had been beautiful then, 19 and glowing with happiness that Mercy had never seen in real life. Harlan's hand rested possessively on her waist, his smile confident and careless. Behind the photograph, tucked into the Bible's back cover, were more papers, letters. Mercy's hands shook as she unfolded the first one. The handwriting was neat, careful, a lawyer's handwriting. "My dearest Elena, I can't stop thinking about you. These weeks in the capital feel like years. I promise I'll come back for you after I finish law school. We'll have our own place, somewhere beautiful where you can plant that garden you always talk about." Mercy's stomach turned. She unfolded another letter. "Elena, my love, you're the only woman I'll ever love. I know my family has expectations, but they don't matter. What we have is real. Wait for me." Another letter, another promise. "I'm going to marry you, Elena. I'm going to give you everything you deserve. A house with a white picket fence and roses by the front door. You'll never have to clean another person's house again." The dates on the letters made Mercy's blood run cold. 23 years ago. Spring, summer, fall. The last letter was dated in October, and Mercy had been born the following June. Her mother had been pregnant when he left. The front door slammed, making Mercy jump. Heavy footsteps stomped through the house. "Mercy, you home?" Tommy's voice, rough from a day at the lumber mill. 15 years old and already working like a man because they needed the money. Elena had died owing everyone in town and someone had to pay the bills. "In here," Mercy called. Tommy appeared in the doorway, sawdust in his dark hair and grease stains on his work shirt. He looked older than 15, the way kids do when they grow up too fast. His eyes found the letters scattered across Elena's bed. "What's all this?" "Lies." Mercy's voice came out bitter. "Just lies." Tommy stepped closer, picking up one of the photographs. He studied Harlan's face, his forehead creased in concentration. "He looks familiar." "He should. He's the judge, the one who came back from the Capitol 6 months ago." Tommy's expression shifted, hardening into something dangerous. Everyone in town knew Judge Harlan Cray. He'd been making decisions about their lives from his courthouse ever since he returned. foreclosures on families who couldn't pay their mortgages, custody battles that always seemed to favor the rich, sentences for boys like Tommy who sometimes got caught stealing food when the money ran out. You think he's... I know he is. Tommy set the photograph down carefully, like it might explode. How do you know? I cleaned his cabin today, found Mama's initials carved under his kitchen sink. Jesus. She kept all his letters, all his promises. Look at the dates, Tommy. Tommy picked up the letters, scanning the dates with eyes that were too smart for his age. Mercy watched him do the math, watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. She was pregnant. Yeah. He left her pregnant. Yeah. Tommy sank onto Elena's bed, surrounded by the evidence of their father's betrayal. The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with ghosts and secrets that had been festering for 23 years. All this time, Tommy whispered, and he knew we existed. Maybe he didn't know about us. He knew about Mama. That's enough. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley, like a cry for help. The porch creaked under their weight as Mercy and Tommy sat in the gathering darkness. Elena's letters spread between them like evidence at a crime scene. The wooden boards had warped over the years, and the railing needed paint. But it was theirs. The only thing Elena had left them besides debt and secrets. All this time, Tommy said, his voice hollow, and he knew we existed. Maybe he didn't know about us. But even as Mercy said it, she didn't believe it. He knew about Mama. That's enough. The crickets were starting their evening song, a sound that used to comfort Mercy, but now felt like mockery. Everything normal felt wrong now that she knew the truth. Remember when we got that foreclosure notice last month? Tommy picked up one of the letters, squinting at it in the dim light. Mama just sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for an hour. She was always staring at bills. No, this was different. She looked scared. Mercy remembered. Elena had gone white as paper when the notice came. Not angry, not worried, scared, like she'd been expecting it, but hoping it would never come. She knew he was back in town, Mercy said quietly. Course she did. Everyone knew Judge Cray was coming back. Big news when someone important returns to a place like this. She knew he was making decisions about us, about our house. The weight of it settled over them like a lead blanket. Their mother had lived for 6 months, knowing that her children's fate was in the hands of the man who abandoned her. Every foreclosure notice, every unpaid medical bill, every rejection for financial aid had come from his courthouse. Why didn't she tell us? Tommy's voice cracked on the question. Because she was protecting us. From what? From being his bastard children in a town where he's king. The words hung in the air between them. Bastard children. That's what they were, and Elena had known exactly what that would mean in a place where family names mattered more than anything else. People already look at us funny, Tommy said. The Vega kids, poor and fatherless, always scraping by. Now we know why she never fought harder, never demanded more from the system. She was scared they'd find out. She was scared we'd get hurt worse than we already were. Mercy thought about all the times Elena had taken no for an answer when she should have fought, when Tommy needed new shoes for school and the assistant's office turned them down, when Elena needed medicine she couldn't afford and just went without, when their electricity got shut off and Elena paid the reconnection fee instead of arguing about the late charges. She protected a secret that was killing her, Mercy said, and it killed her anyway. The medical bills were still coming, even 6 months after Elena's funeral. Bills for treatments she'd delayed too long, tests she'd put off until it was too late. Elena had died owing $14,000 to doctors who might have saved her if she'd come to them sooner. What do we do? Tommy asked. Mercy stared out at the dark woods where Harlan's cabin sat hidden among the pine trees. She could almost feel it out there, full of his guilt and their mother's ghost. I don't know yet. But something cold and determined was growing in her chest. She thought about Elena's hands, always cracked and bleeding from cleaning other people's houses. She thought about the promises in those letters, written in careful handwriting by a man who never meant to keep them. She thought about justice and what it might look like. He's got money, Tommy said quietly. Power. He decides who keeps their house and who gets thrown out on the street. He's got secrets, Mercy replied. That's power, too. What kind of secrets? The kind that end careers, the kind that destroy reputations. Tommy looked at her sharply. You thinking about blackmail? I'm thinking about truth. Same thing sometimes. Maybe. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Still distant but getting closer, the air felt heavy, charged with electricity that made the hair on Mercy's arms stand up. Storm's coming, Tommy said. Yeah. They sat in silence, listening to the approaching weather. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called out, a lonely sound that echoed off the trees. Another answered from across the valley, and then another, until the whole forest seemed to be having a conversation in a language only they understood. Mama used to say storms wash things clean, Tommy said. Sometimes they just wash things away. Maybe that's what we need. Mercy gathered up the letters, folding them carefully and tucking them back into her pocket. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble at any moment, but the words written on it were solid as stone. Tomorrow I'm going back to his cabin. Why? Because this isn't over. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the porch roof, like coins dropping into a collection plate. In the distance, lightning flickered behind the clouds, and the thunder grew louder. The whiskey burned, going down, but Harlan's hand still shook as he poured another shot. The cabin felt smaller tonight, walls pressing in like a coffin. He'd found the photograph wedged behind the kitchen drawer when he was looking for matches, and now it sat on the table in front of him like an accusation. Elena, 19 and glowing, her hand resting on her belly. She stood beside his old pickup truck, the one he'd sold before leaving for law school. Her smile was radiant, the kind of joy that came from believing in promises. He remembered taking that picture. He remembered leaving 3 days later. The phone rang, shrill and sudden in the quiet cabin. Harlan stared at it for 3 rings before picking up. Harlan, it's Senator Walsh. Senator. Harlan's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. Tried to sound professional. We need to talk about your appointment to the state Supreme Court. The governor's office is asking questions. What kind of questions? The kind that require clean answers. Your record is spotless, but they're doing deep background checks, family history, personal relationships. You understand. Harlan's eyes fixed on Elena's photograph. Of course. Any skeletons I should know about? Anything that might cause problems? The silence stretched too long. Walsh's voice sharpened. Harlan! No skeletons, Senator. Good. This appointment is too important to lose over some old indiscretion. The hearing is in 6 weeks. The line went dead. Harlan set the phone down and reached for the whiskey bottle. His reflection stared back from the window, ghostly and distorted. But for a moment, he could swear he saw Elena standing behind him, her hand on her pregnant belly, her eyes full of betrayal. He spun around. Nothing. Just shadows and guilt and the smell of lemon soap that wouldn't fade no matter how many times he opened the windows. Elena, he whispered to the empty room. The silence that answered felt alive, heavy with presence. Somewhere in the walls, the cabin settled with a groan that sounded almost like a voice, almost like his name being called from a great distance. Harlan poured another drink and tried not to think about the girl with Elena's eyes and Elena's stubborn chin, who'd counted his coins with shaking hands. Across town, Mercy knocked on Rebecca Torres's front door. The librarian's house sat on Elm Street, painted yellow with white shutters and a garden full of roses that Elena had helped plant years ago. Rebecca answered wearing a flour-dusted apron, her graying hair pulled back in a bun. Mercy, sweetheart. What brings you by so late? I need to talk to you about Mama. Rebecca's expression shifted, becoming careful. Come in. I'll put on coffee. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old books. Rebecca had always smelled like the library, even at home. She'd been Elena's closest friend since high school, the only person who knew all of Elena's secrets. Or so Mercy had thought. Your mama was the strongest woman I ever knew, Rebecca said, pouring coffee into chipped ceramic mugs. But she carried burdens that weren't hers to carry. What do you mean? Rebecca hesitated, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. How much do you know about your father? I know who he is. Lord have mercy. Rebecca sank into a chair across from Mercy. How did you find out? I cleaned his cabin today, found Mama's initials carved under his kitchen sink. Oh, honey. I found letters too. Love letters. Promises he never kept. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, studying Mercy's face. Finally, she stood and walked to a cabinet above the refrigerator. She pulled out a manila envelope, yellowed with age. She asked me to give you this if anything ever happened to her. Mercy's heart hammered as she took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in Elena's careful handwriting. Inside were more letters, but these were different. Medical bills Elena had hidden from her children, bills for treatments she'd delayed, tests she'd put off, medicine she couldn't afford. At the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note, dated just 3 months before Elena died. Mercy's hands trembled as she read her mother's final words. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've found out about your father. I want you to know I chose to keep his secret, not because he deserved it, but because I thought you deserved better than growing up with his shame. I was wrong. The truth is always better than lies, even when it hurts. Be stronger than I was. Love, Mama. The words blurred as tears filled Mercy's eyes. Rebecca reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She was protecting you, Rebecca said softly. She was protecting him. Maybe both. She died owing $14,000 in medical bills. Bills she hid from us because she was ashamed. She was scared, honey, scared that if people knew the truth, you and Tommy would pay the price. Mercy wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What price? The price of being Judge Cray's bastard children in a town where he holds all the power. The kitchen fell quiet except for the tick of the old clock on the wall. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm still building. She loved you both more than anything, Rebecca said, but she loved him too, even after everything. How could she still love him? First love never really dies, sweetheart. It just gets buried under disappointment and time. Mercy folded the note carefully and put it back in the envelope. Elena's final gift, the truth, wrapped in regret and tied with love. What am I supposed to do with this? Whatever you think is right, Rebecca said. But remember what your mama wrote. Be stronger than she was. 3 days of rain had turned the dirt path to mud, but Mercy walked it anyway, her boots squelching with each step toward Harlan's cabin. She carried Elena's final letter in her jacket pocket, the paper soft from being read and reread. This time, she didn't come to clean. She came to talk. The cabin looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less imposing. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and through the windows she could see the warm glow of lamplight. It looked almost cozy, if you didn't know what kind of man lived inside. Mercy knocked on the door. Heavy footsteps approached, and then it swung open to reveal Harlan Cray, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His face was haggard, stubble covering his jaw. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 43 years. I was wondering when you'd come back. Were you? He stepped aside to let her in. The cabin smelled like whiskey and regret. On the kitchen table sat a half-empty bottle of bourbon next to a stack of legal papers and an overflowing ashtray. Harlan had never smoked when he was young, but stress had a way of bringing out old habits. Sit, he said, gesturing to the same kitchen table where she'd counted his coins 3 days ago. Please. Mercy pulled out the chair and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Everything had changed since the last time she'd been in this room, but the table looked exactly the same. Scarred wood, worn smooth by years of use. Elena had probably eaten meals at this table when she was young and in love and full of hope. Harlan sat across from her, reaching for the whiskey bottle. His hands shook slightly as he poured himself a shot. You want some? I'm 17. Right. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, wincing. I keep forgetting how young you are. Mama was younger when you left her. The words hit him like a slap. He set the glass down carefully, his knuckles white against the table. I loved your mother. No, you didn't. I did. You left her pregnant and alone. You became a judge while she cleaned houses. You had power while she had nothing. I was young, stupid. My family, they had plans for me. Law school, politics, a career. Stop. Mercy's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. I didn't come here for your reasons. Harlan's mouth closed. He stared at her across the table. This girl who had his chin and Elena's eyes and a strength he'd never possessed. What do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Mercy studied his face, memorizing the features she shared with this stranger who was her father. "I want you to pay for my mother's funeral." Relief flooded Harlan's features. Money was something he understood, something he could handle. "Of course, I can do that. Whatever it cost. I want you to pay the medical bills she couldn't afford." "Yes, absolutely. I'll take care of all of it." "I want you to pay for Tommy's schooling so he doesn't have to work at the mill." Harlan nodded eagerly, already reaching for his checkbook. "College? I can set up a fund, whatever he needs. And I want you to resign from the bench." The relief died in his eyes like a candle being snuffed out. His hand froze halfway to his jacket pocket. "What? You heard me. Mercy, you don't understand. I'm about to be appointed to the state Supreme Court. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. I can do good from that position, real good. Like you did good for my mother? That's different." "Is it?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Rain began to fall harder against the windows, drumming in urgent rhythm against the glass. Harlan's face had gone pale, and his hands trembled as he reached for the whiskey bottle again. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious. Do you have any idea what you're asking? I've worked my entire career for this appointment. 23 years of building my reputation, making connections, proving myself. 23 years while your children grew up thinking they were bastards with no father. I didn't know about you, about Tommy. If I had known." "You would have done what? Married Mama? Given up your precious career for a pregnant cleaning girl?" Harlan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. They both knew the answer. "I can help you now, both of you. I have money, influence. I can make sure you and Tommy have everything you need. Everything except a father who isn't ashamed of us." "I'm not ashamed." "Then resign. Mercy, please. Be reasonable. Think about what you're asking." "I am thinking." "I'm thinking about Mama working 3 jobs while you were playing politics in the Capitol. I'm thinking about her dying alone while you were giving speeches about justice. I can do more good as a Supreme Court justice than what? Than being a decent human being?" Harlan slammed his fist on the table, making the whiskey bottle jump. "You're being naive. The world doesn't work the way you think it does. Sometimes good people have to make hard choices, like abandoning pregnant women, like building something bigger than themselves. Mama was building something too. She was building a family. She was raising your children. I didn't ask her to what? To love you? To believe your promises? To keep your secrets?" The cabin fell silent except for the rain and the sound of Harlan's ragged breathing. He stared at her across the table. This girl who looked so much like Elena, it made his chest ache. "You want to destroy everything I've worked for. I want you to do the right thing." "The right thing for who?" "For Mama, for the woman who died protecting your reputation. She chose to keep quiet. That was her decision. She chose to keep quiet because she knew what kind of man you really are." The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, lightning flickered through the clouds, and thunder rolled across the valley like the voice of God passing judgment. The dream always started the same way. Elena stood at Harlan's kitchen sink, her hands deep in soapy water, washing dishes that seemed to multiply no matter how many she cleaned. She was young in the dream, maybe 19, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her belly curved outward beneath a faded yellow dress, pregnant with promises that would never be kept. Mercy watched from the doorway, unable to move or speak. The kitchen looked different than it did now, brighter somehow, filled with hope instead of guilt. Sunlight streamed through windows that Elena had probably cleaned herself, and there were flowers on the table, wild flowers picked from the meadow behind the cabin. Elena hummed while she worked, a lullaby Mercy remembered from childhood. Her movements were graceful, practiced. The movements of a woman who believed she was building a home instead of just cleaning someone else's house. "Mama," Mercy tried to say, but no sound came out. Elena turned then, her face glowing with the kind of happiness Mercy had never seen in real life. Her mother's eyes were bright, full of dreams that hadn't been crushed yet. "He promised me a garden," Elena said, her voice soft and full of wonder. "Roses by the front door and tomatoes in the back. A place where I could grow anything I wanted." The dream shifted, colors bleeding away like watercolors in rain. Elena's face began to change, aging rapidly, the light in her eyes dimming until they looked exactly like they had the day she died, tired, disappointed, broken. "He promised me a garden," she repeated, but this time her voice was hollow, echoing in the empty spaces where hope used to live. Mercy jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rain drummed against something nearby, but it sounded wrong, too close. She opened her eyes and gasped. She was standing in Harlan's kitchen. Water pooled around her bare feet, cold and dark. The front door hung wide open, rain pouring through the doorway onto the wooden floor she'd scrubbed just days ago. Her nightgown clung to her skin, soaked through, and she was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "Jesus Christ!" Harlan's voice came from behind her. Mercy spun around to find him standing in the bedroom doorway, wearing boxer shorts and an undershirt, his hair sticking up at odd angles. His face was pale in the lamplight, his eyes wide with something that looked like terror. "How did you get in?" The door was open. Her voice came out as a whisper. "No, it wasn't. I locked that door. I've been locking everything since you told me who you were." But even as he said it, they both knew the lock hadn't stopped her. Mercy stared at the open doorway, rain still pouring in, and tried to remember walking here. She remembered the dream, Elena at the sink, the promise of a garden that never came. Everything after that was blank. "You need to go home." "She's here," Mercy whispered, not moving from the puddle of rainwater. "Can't you feel her?" Harlan's face went white as paper. He took a step backward, his shoulder hitting the doorframe. "Don't. You do feel her. She's not here. She's dead." Death doesn't erase 20 years of loving someone. Harlan's hands shook as he reached for the whiskey bottle on his kitchen table. He poured a shot with trembling fingers, spilling bourbon on the wood. "I've been seeing things," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Movement in my peripheral vision, footsteps in empty rooms." "What else?" "Windows opening that I know I closed." "The smell of her perfume in the middle of the night." "She's trying to tell you something." "She's dead." The words came out strangled, desperate. "Dead people don't want things." "Don't they?" Mercy moved through the kitchen slowly, her bare feet silent on the wet floor. She touched the counter where Elena had washed dishes, the stove where she'd cooked meals for a man who would abandon her. Everything in this room held memories of her mother's love and hope and eventual heartbreak. "She worked in this kitchen, slept in your bed, carried your child in her body. You think death erases that? Stop. You think 20 years of guilt just disappears because you don't want to face it?" Harlan downed the whiskey in one gulp, grimacing. "I'll give you whatever money you want. College funds for both of you. A house, a car, anything. Just leave me alone." "Money won't bring her peace." "What will?" Mercy looked around the cabin. At the walls that had witnessed her mother's love and abandonment. At the sink where Elena's initials were still carved into the wood underneath, hidden where only someone cleaning would find them. At the bedroom where Elena had slept beside this man, believing his promises, carrying his child, planning their future together. At the table where Elena had probably eaten breakfast on the morning he left, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see his face for 23 years. Justice. The word hung in the air between them like a prayer. Outside, lightning flickered through the storm clouds, and thunder rolled across the valley with the sound of judgment coming home to roost. The rain continued to pour through the open doorway, washing away the careful facade Harlan had built around his life. "She won't rest until you make this right. I can't bring her back." "No, but you can stop running away." By morning, the secret was loose in the wind like smoke from a house fire. Rebecca Torres had meant to keep quiet, but secrets have a way of growing heavy in small towns. She mentioned something to her sister while buying groceries. Her sister told the postmaster while picking up stamps. The postmaster told his wife, who told the bank teller, who told everyone who came through her window that day. By noon, half the town knew that Elena Vega's daughter was Judge Harlan Cray's child. Mercy walked into Colin's diner at 1 o'clock, same as she did every Tuesday after her shift at the hardware store. But this time, conversation stopped mid-sentence when the bell above the door chimed. Heads turned. Eyes followed her to the counter where she always sat, the same stool Elena had claimed when she was alive. Sarah Collins looked up from wiping down the coffee machine. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s. had owned the diner for 20 years and seen every piece of gossip that passed through this town. She grabbed a mug without being asked and filled it with coffee, black, the way Mercy liked it. Your mama was a good woman. Yes, ma'am. Deserved better than what life gave her. The other customers nodded, murmuring agreement. Old Tom Patterson sat in his usual booth, folding his newspaper with deliberate care. Martha Webb picked at her apple pie, her eyes soft with memory. These people had known Elena since she was young, had watched her work herself to the bone, cleaning their houses and raising her children alone. Elena never caused trouble, Tom said, his voice carrying across the quiet diner. Always minded her own business, always paid her bills when she could. Remember when she cleaned the church for free every Sunday? Martha added. Never asked for anything in return. Hard worker, someone else murmured. Good mother. Mercy sipped her coffee and felt something warm spread through her chest. These people remembered her mother with kindness, with respect. Elena had been loved in this town, even if she'd never felt it while she was alive. The bell above the door chimed again, and the warmth died like a candle in the wind. Sheriff Morgan stepped inside, his uniform pressed, his badge catching the fluorescent light. He was a big man with thinning hair and the kind of face that had seen too much compromise over the years. He'd been Harlan's friend since childhood, his campaign manager in every election. Mercy. His voice carried the weight of authority. I need to talk to you. About what? About leaving Judge Cray alone. He's got important work to do. The diner went dead quiet. Sarah's hand tightened on the coffee pot until her knuckles went white. Tom Patterson's newspaper crackled as his grip tightened. Every person in the room was suddenly very interested in their food. What kind of work? The kind that benefits this whole town. Jobs, development, progress. My mother could have used some progress. Sheriff Morgan's eyes hardened. Your mother made her choices. My mother was 19 years old and pregnant. That's ancient history. Ancient history that killed her. The sheriff took a step closer to the counter, his hand resting on his belt near his radio, a threat subtle but clear. Judge Cray's personal life isn't your business. He's my father. That's just talk. Wild accusations from a grieving girl. It's the truth. Truth is what we can prove in court, and you've got nothing but old gossip and fairy tales. But from the corner booth, a younger voice spoke up. Deputy Santos, barely 25, had grown up with Tommy, played football in high school before joining the force. His uniform was newer than the sheriff's, his conscience still mostly intact. Sheriff, maybe we should let the girl speak her piece. Morgan's head snapped toward his deputy like a rattlesnake striking. Maybe you should remember who signs your paycheck. I remember who I took an oath to serve. The tension in the diner could be cut with a knife. Sarah Collins set down the coffee pot with a sharp click, her jaw set in a way that said she'd heard enough. Elena Vega cleaned my house for 10 years, she said, her voice steady and strong. She was worth 10 of any man in this town, and everyone here knows it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the diner. Tom Patterson nodded. Martha Webb straightened in her seat. Even old Pete Morrison, who rarely spoke to anyone, grunted his approval. Sheriff Morgan's face flushed red. You people don't understand the bigger picture. Judge Cray brings prestige to this town. Federal grants. Investment opportunities. What did he bring Elena? Mercy asked quietly. That's not my concern. It should be. I've got a job to do, and part of that job is keeping the peace. Judge Cray is a respected member of this community, and I won't have him harassed by wild stories and blackmail schemes. Blackmail? That's what this is, isn't it? You want money, a payoff to keep quiet. Mercy stood up slowly, fishing coins from her pocket to pay for her coffee. The same coins Harlan had paid her for cleaning his cabin, the same coins that had started all of this. Sheriff, I don't want his money. Then what do you want? Justice. She dropped the coins on the counter with a soft clink. Sarah pushed them back toward her with a shake of her head, but Mercy was already walking toward the door. Tell Judge Cray I'll be back tomorrow. The bell chimed as she stepped outside, leaving behind a diner full of people who were finally ready to choose sides in a war that had been brewing for 23 years. Harlan made his calls from the leather chair in his cabin's living room, a tumbler of whiskey within easy reach. Power was currency in small towns, and he'd been collecting favors for decades. Time to spend them. The first call went to Martin Webb at First National Bank. They'd been friends since college, both members of the same fraternity, both believers in the old boy network that kept men like them in control. "Martin, it's Harlan. I need a favor." "Course, buddy. What can I do for you?" "The Vega family mortgage. I need you to accelerate the foreclosure process." A pause. "Harlan, that's Elena's place, the woman who died last winter. I know who it is. Her kids are still living there, just teenagers. They'll find somewhere else." Another pause, longer this time. "This wouldn't have anything to do with the rumors going around town, would it?" "What rumors?" "About Elena's girl being your daughter." Harlan's grip tightened on the phone. "Just business, Martin. They're behind on payments." "I'll see what I can do." The second call went to Bill Harrison at the lumber mill. They'd done business together for years, the mill needing legal advice, Harlan needing Harrison's political support during elections. "Bill, I need you to let Tommy Vega go." "The kid. He's a good worker. Never late, never causes trouble." "I don't care. Find a reason." "Harlan, what's this about?" "Does it matter?" Harrison sighed. "I suppose not. Cutbacks it is." The third call was to the school district superintendent. Margaret Phillips owed her job to Harlan's recommendation 3 years ago when the previous superintendent retired under mysterious circumstances involving missing funds. "Margaret, I need Mercy Vega's scholarship application denied. She's a good student." Harlan, "High grades, clean record. Find a reason to disqualify her." "I can't just—" "You can, and you will, unless you'd prefer to explain to the school board how those missing funds from 3 years ago really disappeared." The line went quiet. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was tight. "Consider it done." Harlan hung up and poured himself another whiskey. 3 calls. 3 problems solved. This was how the world worked for men like him. Power was a web, and he sat at the center, pulling strings that moved entire lives. But some strings, he was beginning to learn, pulled back. Tommy came home that evening with sawdust in his hair and defeat in his shoulders. Mercy was at the kitchen table, working on homework she might never get to use if her scholarship disappeared. She looked up when the door slammed harder than usual. "They let me go." Mercy's pencil stopped moving. "What?" "Fired. Effective immediately." "Why?" "They said cutbacks." Tommy pulled out a kitchen chair and dropped into it like his bones were made of lead. "But everyone knows why." Mercy set down her pencil, guilt twisting in her stomach like a knife. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. This is my fault." "No, it's not. It's his fault for being a coward. It's their fault for protecting him. But if I hadn't—" "If you hadn't what?" "Told the truth. Stood up for Mama." Tommy reached across the table and grabbed her hand. His fingers were rough from mill work, calloused and strong. "I'm proud of what you're doing. Even if it costs us everything." "Everything was already gone the day Mama died. At least now we're fighting back." They sat in the kitchen's yellow light, brother and sister united by grief and rage, and the kind of love that makes people do dangerous things. Outside, night was falling fast, and somewhere in the darkness, Harlan Cray was making more calls, pulling more strings, using his power like a weapon against children who had never asked to be born. At 8 o'clock, a car pulled into their driveway. Expensive, quiet, the kind of vehicle that belonged to people who never worried about gas money. Mercy watched through the window as a figure emerged from the passenger seat. Tall, elegant, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd never worked a day in her life. Mrs. Eleanor Cray, Harlan's mother. The town matriarch who controlled half the local charities and all of the social pecking order. The knock on the door was soft, polite, utterly terrifying. Mercy opened it to find a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a different century. Pearl necklace, expensive dress, hair styled in a way that probably cost more than the Vega family's monthly grocery budget. Mrs. Cray's eyes were pale blue, cold as winter sky, and they studied Mercy with the kind of calculation usually reserved for livestock auctions. "May I come in?" It wasn't really a question. Mrs. Cray stepped past Mercy into the humble kitchen, her gaze taking in the worn linoleum, the secondhand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. Her expression said everything about what she thought of the Vega family's circumstances. "You need to stop this nonsense." What nonsense? These lies about my son. They're not lies. Mrs. Owl, Cray's composure cracked slightly, a hairline fracture in her perfect facade. Do you have any idea what this could do to his career? To our family name? What about our family? What about my mother's name? Your mother was a cleaning girl who got ideas above her station. The slap happened before Mercy realized she'd moved. Her palm connected with Mrs. Cray's cheek with a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. The old woman staggered backward, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with shock and outrage. My mother was worth 10 of your son. How dare you? Get out! Mrs. Cray straightened her pearls with shaking fingers, her mask sliding back into place, but her cheek was red and her voice trembled with fury. This isn't over. No, ma'am, it's not. The old woman swept out of the kitchen and into the night, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the promise of more trouble to come. Mercy watched through the window as the car disappeared into darkness, its taillights like angry eyes fading into the distance. Tommy emerged from his room where he'd been listening to every word. You think we're in over our heads? Mercy touched the spot on the mantel where her mother's photograph used to sit before she'd hidden it away with the rest of Elena's secrets. The wood was lighter there, a ghost outline of the frame that had protected her mother's memory. Maybe. But Mama was in over her head too, and she survived. She raised us. She kept us together. And look where it got her. It got her us. It got her 23 years of loving her children. That's not nothing. Tommy nodded slowly. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the old house creak like it was settling in for a fight. So what happens now? Now we see just how far they're willing to go to protect their secrets, and how far we're willing to go to expose them. Yeah. They stood together in their mother's kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of her sacrifices and the weight of choices that would define the rest of their lives. The phone rang at 6 a.m, jarring Mercy from restless sleep. She fumbled for the receiver, still half lost in dreams of her mother's voice. Mercy, it's Rebecca. You need to come to the library now. What time is it? Early, but this can't wait. What's wrong? I found something. About your mama. About Harlan. Just come. The line went dead. Mercy stared at the phone, her heart already racing. She dressed quickly, left a note for Tommy, and drove through the empty streets to the library. Rebecca was waiting by the back door, her face tight with urgency. Follow me. Rebecca led her through the library's main floor and down a narrow staircase to the basement archives. Boxes lined the walls, filled with decades of local newspapers, yearbooks, and documents that chronicled the town's history. The air smelled like old paper and forgotten secrets. After what you told me about your mama, I started thinking. Rebecca pulled out a cardboard box marked 1970, 1980. Your mother wasn't the only young woman Harlan Cray spent time with before he left town. She rifled through yellowed newspapers until she found what she was looking for, a front-page article from 25 years ago, complete with photograph. The headline read, "Local student receives full scholarship to state law school." Look at this. In the photo, Harlan stood surrounded by friends and family, his smile confident and bright. He looked impossibly young, untouched by guilt or consequence. But Mercy's eyes were drawn to a smaller article on the same page, tucked into the bottom corner like an afterthought. Local woman leaves for California. The brief paragraph mentioned Maria Santos, 19, who had left town suddenly to stay with relatives on the West Coast. No reason given, no return date mentioned. She was pregnant too, Rebecca said quietly, left to stay with relatives in California. Never came back. Mercy stared at the timeline, her hands trembling as she held the newspaper. Maria Santos had left town 2 years before her mother got involved with Harlan, 2 years before Elena started believing in promises that were never meant to be kept. There might be others. They spent the morning digging through records, following patterns that emerged like threads in a tapestry of abandonment. Young women who left town during Harlan's high school and college years. Unexplained departures that families explained away with vague mentions of opportunities or family matters. Sarah Chen, 1978, left for nursing school that no one could name. Lisa Williams, 1979, moved to help an aunt who didn't exist in any records. Anna Burke, 1981. Simply disappeared one autumn, her family claiming she'd found work in the city. He's been doing this his whole life, Mercy whispered, staring at the collection of newspaper clippings and yearbook photos. And getting away with it. Men like him always do. They have money, connections, reputations to protect. What about the women? What about their reputations? Rebecca's smile was sad and knowing. Women like Maria Santos don't have reputations worth protecting, not in the eyes of people who matter. That afternoon, Mercy drove to the next county with Maria Santos's current address written on a scrap of paper. The drive took 2 hours through rolling hills and farmland that looked exactly like home, but felt foreign somehow. She found the clinic where Maria worked, a small building that served the rural community with basic medical care. Maria Rodriguez was in her 40s now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined by years of hard work and harder choices. But when she smiled at a child getting a checkup, Mercy saw the ghost of the 19-year-old girl who'd loved Harlan Cray before he destroyed her life. "Excuse me, are you Maria Rodriguez?" Maria looked up from her charts, her expression cautious. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Mercy Vega. I think you knew my mother, Elena Vega." Maria's face went pale. She glanced around the waiting room, then gestured toward a door marked private. "We should talk." They sat in Maria's garden behind her small house, surrounded by vegetables she'd grown with her own hands, tomatoes and peppers, beans climbing wooden stakes, herbs that filled the air with the scent of hope made real. It was the kind of garden Elena had dreamed of, but never got to plant. "I wondered if anyone would ever come asking about Harlan Cray," Maria said, pouring iced tea from a pitcher beaded with condensation. "You know why I'm here. I saw the rumors about you being his daughter." "They're not rumors." Maria nodded slowly. "I figured you have his eyes, same as my son." The words hit Mercy like a physical blow. "Your son. He's 26 now, lives in San Diego. Never knew his father's name until last week when I saw Harlan's picture in the newspaper. That appointment to the state Supreme Court. You told him. He had a right to know. Same as you did." They sat in silence, two women connected by the same man's cruelty, the same pattern of abandonment that stretched across decades. "What stopped you from coming forward before?" "Fear, shame, the same thing that probably stopped your mother." "But not anymore." Maria's hands were steady as she refilled their glasses. "Not anymore. I built this life, this garden, this practice. I helped raise 3 kids with a man who loved me enough to heal the wounds Harlan left behind. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Will you help me?" "Help you do what?" "Tell the truth, all of it." Maria smiled, and for the first time, Mercy saw steel underneath the kindness. "Honey, I've been waiting 25 years for someone to ask." The courthouse was packed tighter than a funeral, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, farmers and shop owners and mill workers crowding together in the stuffy room. They'd come to hear about Harlan's shopping development project, the one that promised jobs and prosperity for everyone. Instead, they were about to witness something else entirely. Harlan sat behind the judge's bench like a king on his throne, wearing his best suit and his most confident smile. Sheriff Morgan flanked him, hand resting casually on his gun belt. In the front row, Mrs. Cray watched the proceedings with the cold satisfaction of someone who believed her family's power was unshakable. The courthouse doors opened with a creak that cut through the murmur of conversation. Mercy walked in first, her chin raised, her mother's strength radiating from every step. Tommy followed, then Maria Rodriguez, then Deputy Santos, then Rebecca Torres. They moved down the center aisle like mourners at a funeral, but there was nothing sad about their purpose. "Before we discuss the development project," Mercy said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room, "I think this town deserves to know the truth about the man making decisions for us." Sheriff Morgan shot to his feet. "Sit down. This is neither the time nor the place for your grievances." "Let her speak," Sarah Collins called out from the back of the room. "Yeah, let her talk," someone else added. "This is highly irregular," Harlan said, but his voice wavered like a man walking on thin ice. "So is abandoning pregnant women," Maria Santos said, rising from her seat in the third row. A murmur ran through the crowd like wildfire. People recognized Maria, remembered her from high school, remembered when she left town suddenly 25 years ago. Old Tom Patterson leaned forward in his seat. Martha Webb whispered to her neighbor. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place in dozens of minds. Mercy and Maria stood together in the center aisle, 2 generations connected by the same man's cruelty. The courthouse fell silent except for the creak of old wood and the sound of breathing. My name is Mercy Vega. My mother was Elena Vega. Judge Cray is my father. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, whispers, the shuffle of feet as people turned to stare at Harlan's pale face. My name is Maria Rodriguez, Maria said, her voice steady and strong. I used to be Maria Santos. Judge Cray is my son's father, too. The temperature in the courthouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mrs. Cray's fan stopped moving. Sheriff Morgan's hand moved to his radio, like he was calling for backup. Mercy pulled out Elena's letters, the ones filled with promises that were never kept. Maria had brought her own evidence, photographs and documents that painted a picture of a man who used young women like tissues, discarding them when they became inconvenient. They read from Elena's final note, from medical bills she'd hidden, from records Rebecca had found in the library archives. They told stories of other women who'd left town quietly, other families who'd been broken by Harlan's carelessness. As they spoke, something strange began to happen. The courthouse grew cold. Really cold. Cold enough that people's breath began to show in the air. The windows rattled without any wind outside. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. She's listening, Mercy whispered, and everyone in the room knew she meant Elena. Papers began to flutter on desks without any breeze to move them. The temperature dropped further. In the back of the room, old Pete Morrison pulled his jacket tighter and muttered something about ghosts walking among the living. Harlan's composure finally cracked like ice on a frozen pond. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice echoing off the courthouse walls. "I was young. I made mistakes. But I've done good work since then. I've helped this town." "Helped who?" Tommy stepped into the aisle beside his sister. "The families you foreclosed on? The kids you sent to jail for stealing food while you lived in your big house? I followed the law." "Whose law?" Mercy's voice carried her mother's strength, her mother's pain, her mother's long-buried rage. "The law that protects men like you and abandons women like her?" The courtroom erupted, people shouting, taking sides, 20 years of resentment and frustration pouring out like water from a broken dam. Farmers who'd lost their land to Harlan's foreclosure orders. Parents whose children had been sent to juvenile detention for crimes born of poverty. Women who'd cleaned his house and known they were worth more than the coins he threw at them. But through it all, the supernatural presence grew stronger. The lights flickered faster. Papers swirled through the air like snow. The wooden benches creaked and groaned as if the building itself was awakening from a long sleep. Sheriff Morgan reached for his gun, but Deputy Santos grabbed his wrist. "Don't. This isn't about violence." "Then what's it about?" "Justice." In the chaos, Harlan saw her. Elena stood by the witness box, exactly as she'd looked the last time he saw her 23 years ago. Young, pregnant, beautiful, heartbroken. She wore the yellow dress from the photograph, the one she'd been wearing when he promised to come back for her. "Elena," he whispered, his voice lost in the shouting crowd. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything that needed saying. 23 years of silence, of secrets, of shame that had eaten at him like cancer. 23 years of her cleaning other people's houses while he wore expensive suits and made speeches about justice. The crowd was on its feet now, some supporting Mercy and Maria, others defending Harlan out of loyalty or fear or simple stubbornness. Mrs. Cray clutched her pearls like a rosary, her face white as paper. Sheriff Morgan shouted for order, but his voice was lost in the storm. And through it all, Elena stood silent by the witness box, her dark eyes fixed on the man who had loved her and left her and forgotten her until it was too late to matter. The supernatural cold intensified until frost began forming on the windows. The lights flickered one final time and went out, plunging the courthouse into darkness filled with the sound of ghosts and guilt and truth finally set free. When the emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, Elena was gone. but her presence lingered in the room like perfume, like memory, like the weight of promises that should never have been broken. Harlan sat behind his judge's bench, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding that some debts can never be paid and some sins can never be forgiven. The reckoning had begun. The resignation letter sat on the courthouse steps like a white flag of surrender. 2 sentences typed on official letterhead, signed in the same careful handwriting that had once promised Elena Vega a garden and a future. No explanation, no statement about personal growth or family obligations, just Harlan Cray's signature and yesterday's date. Sheriff Morgan found it when he arrived for work at 7 in the morning. By 8, half the town knew. By noon, Senator Walsh's office had released a statement about Judge Cray withdrawing his name from consideration for the state Supreme Court due to personal matters requiring immediate attention. But the real change happened in kitchen conversations and diner booths, in phone calls between neighbors who'd never talked about certain subjects before. Martha Webb called her sister in Phoenix to ask about the summer she'd left town so suddenly in 1979. Tom Patterson mentioned to his wife that he'd always wondered why the Santos girl had moved to California so fast. Sarah Collins found herself thinking about the other young women who'd cleaned houses for important men, the ones who disappeared quietly when their situations became inconvenient. The pattern had always been there. The whole town had just chosen not to see it. At Collins' diner, conversations were different now, quieter, more honest. Women shared stories they'd carried alone for decades. Men admitted to suspicions they'd never voiced. The understanding spread like ripples on still water that what happened to Elena and Maria wasn't isolated tragedy. It was part of something bigger, something the community had protected through silence. We all knew, Sarah Collins said to Rebecca Torres over coffee. Maybe not the details, but we knew something wasn't right. Knowing and doing something about it are different things. Are they? Maybe we're all complicit. Maybe. But knowing that is the first step toward changing it. 3 miles away, Mercy walked the familiar path through the pine trees toward Harlan's cabin. She found him loading boxes into his expensive car, the same careful movements she'd watched Elena make countless times when they'd had to move to cheaper housing. "Where will you go?" Harlan looked up from a box of law books, his face haggard. He'd aged 10 years in the past week. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He set the box down slowly, studying her face like he was seeing her for the first time. "Why?" "Because you're still my father, even after everything." They sat on his porch, this father and daughter who'd found each other too late for most things, but maybe not for everything. The afternoon sun slanted through the pine trees, warm on their faces, peaceful in a way that felt foreign after so much chaos. "I can't undo what I did to your mother." "No, you can't. I can't give you back the childhood you should have had." "No." Harlan's hands rested on his knees, trembling slightly. "I can't bring her back so she can see you grown up, strong, fighting for what's right." "No." "Then what can I do?" Mercy considered this, watching a hawk circle overhead. The anger was still there, would probably always be there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the white-hot rage that had driven her to his cabin that first day. It was something cooler now, more purposeful, not revenge, but clarity. "You can stop running away." "What do you mean?" "Stay. Face what you did. Make it right, however you can." "The town will never forgive me." "Maybe not, but you might forgive yourself, and that's something Mama never got the chance to do." Harlan looked at his packed bag sitting by the cabin door, at the car loaded with everything he thought he needed to start over somewhere else. "I don't know how to face this." "Start small." "Like what?" "Pay for Tommy's education, all of it, college, everything he needs." "Okay. Pay off Mama's medical bills, every last cent she owed for treatments she delayed because she was protecting your reputation." "I will." "Set up a fund for other women who need help. Medical bills, legal fees, whatever they need to survive men like you used to be." "Used to be? That's up to you to decide." Harlan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what she was asking. Not just money, though that was part of it. She was asking him to stay and be accountable, to build something positive from the wreckage of his choices. What else? Stop using your power to hurt people who can't fight back. I don't have power anymore. I resigned, remember? You have money, connections, a reputation even if it's damaged. Use those things to help instead of harm. And clean your own house from now on. For the first time in weeks, something like a smile crossed his face. It was small, tentative, but real. Yes, ma'am. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun moved through the trees. Somewhere in the forest, a woodpecker hammered against bark, and the sound echoed through the valley like a heartbeat. Will you visit? Harlan asked finally. Maybe, if you stay. If you do the work. I'll stay. Promise? The word hung between them, loaded with the weight of all the promises he'd broken before. But this one felt different. This one was made in full knowledge of the cost. I promise. Mercy stood to leave, then turned back one last time. She loved you, you know, even after everything, even when it was killing her. I know. Don't make that love meaningless. I won't. She walked back through the pine trees toward home, leaving behind a man unpacking boxes and maybe finally unpacking the guilt that had been eating him alive for 23 years. 6 months later, Mercy stood in Elena's garden behind their small house, surrounded by tomatoes and peppers that had grown wild without her mother's careful tending. The plants sprawled across the raised beds Elena had built with her own hands, producing fruit in chaotic abundance. There was beauty in the disorder, life insisting on itself despite neglect. Tommy emerged from the house carrying a duffel bag, his acceptance letter to the state university folded carefully in his shirt pocket. The tuition fund Harlan had established would cover everything: books, housing, meal plans, all the things Elena had dreamed of but never thought possible. You ready for this? Mercy asked, picking a ripe tomato and handing it to him. Yeah, you? I'll miss you. I'll come home weekends. At least until you leave for college, too. Mercy's own acceptance letter had arrived last month. Her scholarship reinstated after Superintendent Phillips quietly resigned. Sometimes justice worked in small, bureaucratic ways. Harlan called yesterday, Tommy said. Wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. What did you tell him? That I was grateful. That doesn't mean I forgive him, but I'm grateful. They picked vegetables in comfortable silence, filling a basket with the bounty Elena would never see. Down the road, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Deputy Santos, now Sheriff Santos, stepped out wearing his new badge with the kind of dignity the position deserved. Afternoon, kids. How's the packing going? Almost done, Tommy said. You here officially or just checking in? Just checking in. Wanted to make sure you knew Maria's coming by later. Maria Rodriguez visited monthly now. Her presence filling a space Mercy hadn't known was empty. They'd become something like sisters, bonded by shared experience and mutual healing. Maria's son in San Diego had started calling too, curious about his half-siblings, building connections across the miles. She bringing the kids? Mercy asked. All 3 of them. Fair warning, they're planning to raid Elena's garden. Good. Mama would have liked that. The supernatural presence that had haunted Harlan's cabin had faded completely. No more cold spots, no more flickering lights, no more glimpses of Elena standing by windows that shouldn't reflect her image. She was at rest now, her secrets told, her children's futures secured, her truth finally set free. Rebecca Torres arrived as the sheriff was leaving, carrying a manila envelope with careful hands. This came to the library, she said, addressed to Elena Vega's daughter. Mercy opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written in careful cursive. The return address said Christina Vall, Los Angeles, California. Dear Mercy, I saw the newspaper story about Judge Harlan Cray. I recognized him from an old photograph my mother kept hidden in her jewelry box. I think we might be sisters. I think we need to talk. Another one, Rebecca said quietly. Another one. Will you write her back? We all will. Maria, Tommy, me. Maybe her son in San Diego. We're building something here, aren't we? A family. Yeah. Just not the kind anyone expected. That evening, Mercy sat at Elena's kitchen table writing letters. To Christina in Los Angeles. To Maria's son in San Diego. To other women who might be carrying similar secrets. Who might need to know they weren't alone. She was creating a network of truth and survival, connections born not from blood, but from shared experience and mutual support. Through the window, she could see lights glowing in Harlan's cabin. He was still there, still facing what he'd done instead of running away. He worked as a legal aid lawyer now, helping people navigate the same system he'd once used to maintain power. It wasn't redemption, that might never come, but it was a start. A man learning to use his privilege to lift others up instead of keeping them down. The coins he'd paid her for cleaning his house sat in a mason jar on the windowsill, copper catching the last light of day. She'd never spent them, probably never would. They reminded her that some payments couldn't be measured in money, that the work of healing cost everything and nothing at all. Thunder rolled across the hills, low and distant, but moving closer. 6 months ago, the sound would have made her think of her mother's fear, of secrets kept in the dark, of storms that destroyed more than they cleansed. But this time, Mercy wasn't afraid. She'd learned something Elena never had the chance to know, that some truths were worth the lightning they brought, that some storms cleared the air instead of poisoning it. "You did good, Mama," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "You raised us right." The first drops of rain began to fall on Elena's garden, watering tomatoes and peppers that grew wild and free, feeding seeds that would bloom long after the storm passed. Life insisting on itself, love persisting despite loss. Truth taking root in soil that had been poisoned by lies for too long. Outside, the storm arrived in earnest, washing the world clean.